Welcome to Episode 8 of the Dawn of Rebellion podcast. This episode is going to focus mostly on the Middle-earth strategy battle game, the latest edition of the long-standing Lord of the Rings miniatures game put out by Games Workshop. We're going to have a brief rundown of what the game is all about, how it works, how it functions, some of the new changes, and then a Lord of the Rings themed hobby on a shoestring to get you started on this fantastic little system. Hope you enjoy. Before we get started on our Middle-earth exploration, I wanted to make a few quick mentions about some of the latest news coming out of Blood and Glory, which is the most recent Games Workshop event. Some exciting news. They previewed the new Delac models, which look amazing. If you haven't seen them, they're not quite what I was expecting, chiefly because they're all actually bareheaded. I knew that they were going to be bald, but if you listen to the episode 6, my kind of expectation was lots of kind of hoods and cowls and shadowed peaks and that kind of stuff, a bit more Assassin's Creed. But they do look very cool, and I'm pretty sure I'll be picking up a set, although I did recently acquire some Orlok stuff, so they might sap my attention for a little bit. The models look frail, but they had lots of knives. They look quite nasty. I wonder if they'll have some venom-based stuff, a bit like the Escher do. A lot of their weapons were dual-wielded. Lots of them look silenced. There was a guy with a massive sniper rifle slung over his back. Yeah, I think it's going to be really, really cool. Specialist Games team have managed to pull off a real masterclass with these models. Every warband that they put out for Necromunda has looked amazing. But yeah, the Delacs especially have managed to kind of carve their own little niche, which is great. In addition to the new Delac models, they've also announced that they're going to be bringing out a compendium, which is exactly what Tom and I suspected they would do. Although they're doing this instead of doing Gang War 5, which I guess is better in the long run because you won't be buying a 5th book to become obsolete. If you haven't seen the news, they are basically going to be doing a kind of armies book, which has all the gangs, hired guns, bounty hunters, hangers-on, etc. that they've released up till post-Delac. And then a updated and errated rulebook, which will contain all of the rule segments from each of the Gang War books, so the new campaign system. They're basically taking the rulebook, the 4 Gang War books, the Delac stuff to come, and put them into 2 books, which is what it should have been to begin with. I totally understand why they did it. It could have been a system that people weren't after. You know, the internet is a very loud place, but it's also a bit of an echo chamber. It can be the same people making the same amount of noise, and it was probably hard for them to gauge how popular it was going to prove to be. And there's no point investing in a huge model line from the beginning if it's just going to die on its arse. So I understand why they did what they did, but it is frustrating that we now have to buy these 2 new books, and all the stuff we've previously spent, you know, they're not cheap. It is now essentially obsolete. So I will be trying to offload those on eBay before it becomes general knowledge that these things are new versions are coming out. But yeah, exciting times ahead for Necromunda. They didn't put a release date out, but it was always scheduled for Q4. I would imagine they'll want to get them out before Christmas. If they do, I will definitely be asking Santa to bring me some Necromunda goodness. So, what is the Middle-earth strategy battle game? Middle-earth strategy battle game is the latest iteration of a game that has been running since 2001. It was originally released as the Fellowship of the Ring, and was under the kind of general name of the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. It was licensed and ties in with the Peter Jackson version of the movie. So the first box set came out around the same time, I think within like a week or so of the release of the Fellowship of the Ring in cinemas. And the following year, when Two Towers came out, there was a new edition of the game. Same with the Return of the King. So in 2001, 2002, and 2003, we had new updates to the Lord of the Rings system, and it massively expanded from then on. Games Workshop owned the rights to most of the Tolkien literature, with the one glaring exception being the Silmarillion, which the Tolkien estate apparently is a bit precious with. So yeah, we have been told categorically that there will not be sort of characters that are only present in that book, but which is a shame. But you can't have all your cake and eat it. One thing that the Lord of the Rings game tried to do was allow you to recreate the films or the books. And so a lot of the releases were themed around particular events. Box sets themselves, the first one was designed to retell the Fellowship's journey through the Mines of Moria. So for the starter set, you actually got the Fellowship and a shed load of goblins. You got a little tomb model and various bits of terrain that was designed to sort of allow the player to represent the Mines of Moria. The actual box set itself, the physical cardboard box, was also supposed to represent the battlefield, so it was grey on the inside, and this wasn't picked up on by many people, but it was, you were supposed to play some of the missions inside the box, which is something that Games Workshop have done since. I know the Necromunda box set, the bottom half of it is drawn to look like a part of the Underhive. So the first edition of the game, it was a bit limited in scope. You had not a staggering array of units. Again, I think they needed to see how successful this was going to be. I don't think anybody realised quite how successful that movie franchise was going to be until that first film came out, and it really, took off in a way that I think was probably unexpected. But yeah, so the first edition of the game, there wasn't a staggering number of models. The rules weren't hugely complicated, and it was very much sort of pitched as a skirmish game. You would take probably no more than 20-25 models if you were a force of good, maybe 30-35 if you're a force of evil, but that was a big game. With the release of the Two Towers, which was Rohan and Uruk-hai themed, it was supposed to help you do kind of Helm's Deep and the battles around that event. They introduced some new ideas. They introduced cavalry. They introduced basics of siegecraft, so there were rules for towers and collapsing walls and that sort of stuff, and battering down doors. But again, it was this kind of incremental thing. The games were designed to get a little bit bigger, be a little bit more complex, and tell a little bit more of a dynamic story. In the Fellowship edition, if you weren't playing the sort of set scenarios with, well, for instance, the Attack on Weathertop, which was a box set you could buy, which came with 5 ring wraiths, Aragorn or Strider, and the 4 hobbits, and there was a scenario that was designed to be played with those models. Same, there was one for the Battle of Amon Hen, and I think there were a couple of others. It was a while ago now. I can't remember all of them. The army lists for what we would sort of recognise now as match play was a bit limited, and it developed with the Two Towers, with the introduction of Saruman and his ilk, and then in 2003 with the release of Return of the King, you finally got the forces of Gondor. So you got the warriors of Minas Tirith, Knights of Minas Tirith, Rangers, and all this kind of other stuff. And then the forces of Mordor in particular just exploded. There was so much new stuff that came out that year. And it basically, it ticked over for quite a while. They would sort of drip feed new models. It had this officially sort of Games Workshop subcontracted thing out where it was an entirely new set of magazines that had a different model each issue, and a lot of them were alternative sculpts to the ones that were available in stores, which is why if you do some aggressive googling, you'll see about 9 different versions of Legolas. It was in White Dwarf for a long time. They switched the back third of the magazine, so it was upside down, and that back third was all about Lord of the Rings, and this went on for quite a while. I kind of lost interest in the game when I sort of fizzled out of Games Workshop about the age of 17 or so, when I discovered beer and girls, neither of which were particularly conducive to Games Workshopping in my little quiet backward part of the world. And so yeah, I missed a lot of introduction of little models here and there, characters from the lore, characters that created specifically by Games Workshop to fill in gaps for players. So the Tolkien estate gave them a license to create derivative work, and they've done a really good job with it. There's been nothing that I've gone, oh, that's totally off base or completely not fitting with the scene. They've been very respectful of what is canon and made additions where they felt they are necessary, but they haven't been mucking about with too much of the kind of core content. In 2009, they released an expansion called War of the Ring, which was designed to bring sort of apocalypse-scale battles to the Lord of the Rings. I don't think it was hugely successful. The way Lord of the Rings works, the bigger the game goes, there is like an exponential slowdown, and it's not ideal, or at least I don't think it is, to play this game at huge points values. And so the War of the Ring was designed to do just that. And so you would take, rather than buying like 3 or 4 guys, you would buy a squad of 6 or 12, and then they would go on a movement train. It kind of became Warhammer Fantasy, but in Lord of the Rings, which was kind of always what Warhammer Fantasy was kind of doing anyway. So I really didn't. It passed me by, but looking back at it, it looks like it was trying to scratch an itch that wasn't really there. But what do I know? After that expansion, it did kind of die a death a little bit. It all went a little bit quiet. At this point, it was 6 years since The Lord of the Rings Return of the King was released, and I think that the franchise had kind of settled down a bit, and it had its day. That was until 2012, when the Hobbit trilogy movies started. Now, whatever your opinion on those movies, I know that they are not as well received as the original Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson works were. I like them. I think they're quite good fun. As long as if you are a bit of a lore fanatic, then yes, I totally understand why they rub you up the wrong way. But as movies, they are eminently watchable, and they're not meant to be a true, honest, accurate depiction of the book. They are meant to be exciting and interesting stories that have characters that will appeal to everyone. I know, for instance, Tauriel's introduction in the Desolation of Smaug was a real point of contention for quite a few people. Who is this character? Is this just appeasing the masses? But you know what? There are no female characters in that story otherwise, and I don't see any reason why having a sort of strong female lead is a bad thing in that film, but there we are. So yeah, over the next couple of years, the Lord of the Rings was revamped as the Hobbit strategy battle game. They had a brand new starter set, which was called Escape from Goblin Town, which is exactly what it says it was. You had Thorin's company, the Goblin King, and a load of goblins, and some really cool kind of rickety staircase terrain. It was pricey, and it suffered from a bit of price bloat, I think. The models are beautiful, and I think there's probably one of the reasons why the characters in particular can be quite a lot of money for what you get. They are appreciably smaller than Age of Sigmar and 40k models. They're built at heroic scale, whereas the Lord of the Rings, or the Hobbit at that point, models are built to be true scale. Part of the licensing agreement is they are supposed to be accurate depictions of the characters as they are seen in the films. So the Legolas model is supposed to look like Orlando Bloom, and depending on your paint job, it will. So for your 27 quid, which gets you a Legolas and a Legolas on a horse, you can feel a bit ripped off, because they are not as solid and chunky. The detail is amazing, but yeah, there is something not quite as satisfying about the models themselves compared with 40k and Age of Sigmar ones, but you get over that very, very quickly.
Latest work is almost complete. All I need is a bit more oil. Where's the gnome oil? Confounded Pasnigatron, where is the gnome oil? You have one job. Fine. To the alchemist's workshops. Do they have gnome oil? Yes, here it is. Excellent. I might pick up some other things whilst I'm here. Ooh, this looks interesting. Latest releases at bargain prices.
This place is great, boss.
So remember, Pasnigatron, whenever you need hobby supplies, visit thealchemistsworkshops.com.
The game itself is relatively straightforward, and it's actually quite an easy one to pick up and learn. We've introduced quite a few new people to the game, and it's only taken 2 or 3 small games for people to kind of get the hang of it. From there, it's just a question of introducing new rules as and when. If you try and do all of it straight away, it's like any game. You will lose sight of what the game is actually trying to do, because you'll be bogged down in all the rules and this, that and the other. Each round of the game is broken down into various sections. There is the initiative phase, which is hugely important. There's the movement, shoot and fight, and then there is a bit of a kind of consolidation bit at the end. Initiative is vital. Players will roll off and the highest wins. If there's a tie, whoever had initiative last time passes it on to the next player. And how it works is I move everything, you move everything, I shoot, you shoot. Then I, as the person with initiative, decide where the fights take place. This is important because when 2 models are fighting, the model that loses is bumped back an inch, and that can massively disrupt the retreat patterns of other models. If a model can't retreat and it's trapped, the attacker gets to double their attacks. So if you're fighting Aragorn, who's already got 3 attacks, if he can trap you against a wall, he's hitting you for 6 attacks, and there's very little that's going to withstand that. So having initiative is vital. The movement phase is relatively straightforward. Everyone has a movement characteristic. You can move that far. It costs a bit of movement to go over a hedge. It's half movement to go through difficult terrain. Pretty straightforward. The shoot phase, again, it's relatively straightforward. Can you see the model? Yes. Do you have a ranged weapon? Yes, then you can shoot. You have a score to roll. Your profile will have a fight value, which is broken down into 2. The first number is for your close combat score. The second number is for your shooting score. So a warrior of Minas Tirith, a fight value of, I think it's 3 in close combat, and then a 4+. So if you want to shoot something, you need to measure range and go, right, 4+, yep, excellent, I hit. Didn't, and you missed. But for every bit of intervening terrain, after you've made your initial hit, you have to retrace your steps and roll for everything that's in the way. So for every hedge or clump of trees or whatever it might be that's in the way, you roll a simple test. On a 1, 2 or 3, it hits that obstacle. On a 4, 5 or 6, it carries on. So if there are 2 hedges in the way between you and the target, there's a pretty good chance you're going to hit one of the hedges as opposed to the guy. The fight phase is where it becomes a bit more interesting, and it's also the place where the game, I think, can be at its best and worst. The fight system is great in that it's quick and simple, and it doesn't require a staggering amount of rules checking to get through. But it can very quickly turn into a tar pit if both sides have a lot of models. It can take quite a lot to kill somebody in Lord of the Rings. Most models have a relatively low strength versus quite a high defense. So most models, on a good day, you're wounding on a 5 or a 5+, but most are going to be wounding on a 6. You've only got 1 attack. Most fights basically involve the 2 models sort of pushing each other back and forth for a few turns until that 5 or 6 turns up, which can be quite thrilling, especially if it's a close game, but also you sit there going, I've got 30 of these to get through, and it can become a bit tedious isn't the word, because it will only be like that for a couple of turns until numbers start to tell, but it can slow the game down a little bit. Thankfully, the new edition of the Middle-earth strategy battle game, as it's now known, has gone some way to addressing some of these issues. So whereas before it was pretty much hand weapons were hand weapons, and they gave you an attack, now there are different strikes you can make depending on the nature of the weapon that you have. So picks and axes have a new type of attack that they can make that gives them a boost, but there's always a drawback. Similarly, if you've got a sword or a dagger, you can feint now, which gives you various boosts, and it gives you a bit more flexibility, and it's designed to stop that sort of tar pit from developing or from lasting for too long. Your army is made up of heroes and warriors. The first thing you need to do is decide whether you're going to be good or evil. From there, it's a matter of picking which sort of faction within the forces of good or forces of evil you wish to be. I play mostly elves of various flavours, but there are dozens to choose from. Of elves alone, there's 3 or 4 I think you can run, and there's different versions kind of within that, and there's ways of theming a list so that even if you've got a Lothlorien list, which is what I primarily have, you can have a cavalry list, you can have an armoured list, you can have a wood elf cloak list, you can mix them up, you can have a Galadriel magic-y list. There's loads you can do with actually a reasonably small model range. So you pick your faction. The next thing you need to do is you need to pick who's going to be your leader. There's no hard and fast rule on this. There are some models that have to be your leader. Like if you've chosen Sauron, he has to be the leader of that army. He can't not be. But by and large, it's up to you to choose who you want to be in overall charge of the force. Now, in the old version, a hero was points limited as a percentage of your overall force. So if you had a 500, I think it was 50%. So if you had a 500 point force, only 50% of your points could be spent on heroes. With the introduction of the Hobbit, this morphed into a warband system where a leader could take 12 followers, and if you wanted a 13th follower, you needed another hero. This was a great idea, and it was designed to bring in, allow kind of some of the lesser characters that just didn't make an appearance to give them a justified role on the battlefield. You know, you're not necessarily going to take Éowyn, Shield Maiden of Rohan, because she's not very good, and for 30 points you can get 2 more guys on horses, which is going to be a better use of your points. But if you need a new leader, actually she's a really cheap way of getting those extra guys on the board anyway. This had the overall effect, though, of kind of reducing the impact that heroes made, because there were generally more lower tier heroes in the game, because you had to, it was basically a tax that you had in order to have the extra guys. So especially if you're an evil player, where your base orcs are 5-6 points, you end up with lots of fairly crap heroes filling up the slots. But because heroes all could essentially do the same thing with their special characteristics, which are known as might, will, and fate, if you're a hero, you have these things. A might point allows you to manipulate action rolls. So if you want to get the jump on the enemy or improve a dice score by 1, you'd spend your might points for that. Will points is about casting and resisting magic. And then fate points are one-off invulnerable saves. There was a very short list of things that heroes could do with their might points. But whether you were Aragorn or a goblin captain, you could do the same things. And it didn't give the characters that much flavour. Because there's only so many stats and there was only so much equipment, you know, Aragorn and Boromir didn't really feel hugely different. And, you know, an orc captain was an orc captain wherever you went. And the game just had a little bit of sort of shallowness to it that was perhaps a little bit jarring, and not what the book is all about, because, you know, the characters are so rich and detailed in The Lord of the Rings that to have a character system that was quite flat was a bit disjointed. So in the Middle-earth edition, heroes have been tiered. So the more legendary a hero was, the more followers it can have. So Aragorn can lead 18 guys, Faramir can lead 12, for instance, whereas before they would both lead 12. Heroes now have there is a much bigger list of heroic actions that can be taken, including things like heroic challenge, which is where you call out an enemy, so rather than stop you being ambushed, that enemy leader has to sort of step forward and fight you 1-to-1. There's heroic strike, which gives you bonuses to your strength. There's heroic defense, and each character has access to 2, 3, 4, 5 of these, depending on kind of how awesome that character is. So Thranduil, who's the king of Mirkwood, has quite a long list of heroic skills because he's this prolific, amazing, awesome elven warrior, whereas a captain of Gondor has heroic march, which means that he and his guys can walk a bit faster for a turn, but they're not doing, you know, these huge sort of feats of daring do and this, that, and the other. So it makes you taking the named heroes that much more worthwhile, because it gives you greater flexibility with what you can do with your might points. You do need to check, because whilst they have tried to be as reflective as possible, there are some things you think, oh, he should definitely be able to do that, and you're checking, oh, actually, no, they can't. So you need to kind of know your rules. So yeah, so where the old edition heroes were quite samey, the new edition has made them much more thematic, which I definitely think is a change for the better. Quick note on shooting. Shooting is pretty crap in Lord of the Rings. The bows are not great. Elven bows are probably the best. Crossbows have the highest strength, but you can't move and shoot with them, which makes them quite, they're good for defense, but the movement is key in this game and you want to be on your feet. But even Legolas, who has a special rule that means he can shoot 3 times, is still wounding goblins on a 5. So math hammering, he's not killing that much with his shooting attacks, which was why in the White Dwarf bit that they did, Gimli slayed far more Uruk-hai than Legolas did. Yeah, shooting isn't great. Volume of fire, which you might think is the solution to the problem of needing high dice rolls, is limited because you cannot have more than a third of the warriors in your list armed with bows. That isn't points, that's physical models. So if you've got 30 warriors in your list, you can only have 10 of them armed with bows. So yeah, not only is it not very good, it's quite limited. That said, it can be bloody hilarious when it works, and not having archers does put you at a tactical disadvantage. But yeah, don't hinge any battle plans on feathering up your enemy, because it's probably not going to work. Whilst it's only the models in base-to-base combat that actually fight, if a friendly model is armed with a spear, they can support, which means if you can get one in base-to-base combat with your engaged model, so you tend to have them sort of make a little bit of a chain, a guy with a spear can support, and you get to roll 1 extra attack dice, which is really, really helpful. It does have some limitations. If you've got a two-handed weapon, you can't be supported because you're too busy sort of swinging this massive sword around, and this little spear is just going to get in the way. And likewise, if you're using a shield to do the shielding special rule, which is where you go, I'm basically going to hide behind my shield, you get to roll double your normal attacks. So normally, if most models have got 1 attack, if you shield, you roll 2, which gives you a better chance of winning the duel. But if you win the duel, all you do is punt the enemy back the standard inch, and you don't get to make any killing strikes. So it's just a way of sort of surviving another turn, and it's good if you need to like hold an objective, or you need to wait for your hero to catch up, or kill their own duels and then come and save you. The game itself, as with all Games Workshop games these days, is designed to be played in a couple of ways. There's the narrative way, which absolutely is I think the most fun way of playing the game, either developing your own scenarios, or there's a raft of them in both the Armies book and the rule book, and they're all there, from the Mines of Moria to the Fall of Khazad-dûm. There's a proper lore version of the Battle of Pelennor Fields, which includes people like Eladan and Elrohir, which are Elrond's twin sons, who were there going under the mountains with Aragorn. And yeah, there's loads of them. That's the best way, recreating those scenes. That's why you love the books. It's why you play the game. Match play, however, is great fun as well. They have kind of 3 tiers of match play. They have, I think it's called Skirmish, which is anything below about 600 points. They reckon sort of 400 is a good sort of skirmish game size. 400 points, if you're an evil player, you might get 3 warbands out of it. If you're a good player, you'll probably get 2. They won't be maxed out, especially if you're playing elves or dwarves, which are a bit more expensive points-wise. 600 to about 900 or 1,000 is kind of the main battle. A skirmish game will take you about an hour to an hour and a half. A main battle will probably take you about 2 hours, maybe plus a little bit to set things up. And then beyond that, anything sort of over 1,000 points is going to take you a long time to finish off. As I mentioned earlier, the more models you have on the board, the more of these one-to-one arrangements you have to fight. So when you end up with 100 models in combat, that's 100 individual sets of dice rolls you have to make. This isn't a squad v squad thing like it is in 40k or Age of Sigmar. You go, well, here's 6 guys shooting at those 6 guys. You go, well, he's shooting at him, next guy's shooting, and the next guy and next guy. You have to do it that way. You can't just go, here's 5 shooting and those 5, because who you take off is important and it matters. You could house rule it and say you can do squad based actions, but that's not what the game is designed for, and it doesn't really work properly that way. I think there is potential for kind of gaminess and gamesmanship doing it that way. So 600 points is if you're happy with the rules, that's a good kind of game to do. That's what we do at our local club. So 600 points, you can get 2 games in of a kind of 4 or 5 hour evening. That's absolutely fine. But if you are interested in getting started, you don't need that many. 250 is a solid warband, and will be enough to give you kind of a number of units to go over the basic rules. And 400 points is a good place to get started. So what we're going to do later on in the episode is we're going to do a hobby on the shoestring, specifically pitched Lord of the Rings. It won't take long because there isn't a huge number of models out at the moment. There's lots of warrior models, but actually a lot of the heroes are out of print and will be coming back very slowly, I would imagine. They have said stuff on the Warhammer community site that they will all be coming back eventually, but for now, a good, very large percentage of the hero models that are listed in the army books aren't actually available to buy. You'll find a lot of them on eBay at very variable prices. I have seen Gamling, who is Theoden's kind of chief advisor, go from being up there from anything from £3 to about, I think with his royal standard, about £300. I'm currently looking for a Thranduil, the Mirkwood Elven King, and he has 4 different models. There's an old school one of him looking a bit fairy tale like with a staff and a sword. I don't want that one. There is a Hobbit 1 from Desolation of Smaug, where he is kind of standing with his kind of royal cape on and holding a sword. There is, he's currently on eBay for £100, which is a £15 model. There is a version of him wielding 2 swords on foot and mounted, which usually costs £27. I've seen that on for £140. And then Forge World do a character series model of him riding his elk, which is £40, which bizarrely I saw go for £82 on eBay. So there's some weird people out there paying, over the odds for these models. So yeah, if you are going to go looking for them, check Games Workshop first, because a lot of the time you'll actually find them for cheaper than what people are offering you on eBay. The new starter set for Middle-earth strategy battle game is based on the Battle for Pelennor Fields, which, if you're unfamiliar with the lore, is the big fight outside the city of Minas Tirith. And they focused on the Charge of the Rohirrim, when the warriors of Rohan, led by Theoden, try and break the lines of Mordor. So in the box set you get a set of Riders of Rohan, and then I think you get 12 guys on foot, as well as a squad of the Armies of the Dead, which are the undead people that Aragorn brings into the battle. Opposing them, you get a shed load of orcs. I think there's something like 36 in the set, led by the Witch King of Angmar on a fell beast. You also get a new Theoden model. It's the only new model in the kit, which is a bit of a shame. The models, a lot of them are they're not dated, but they are a little bit products of their time. So if you look at the Warriors of Rohan sculpts, they are 16 years old now, and they're starting to look it. They're a little bit rough around the edges. The detail's not as much as what they can churn out now, but they do look like what they're supposed to look like. So in that respect, it's not a problem. You get the proper rulebook. You don't get the armies book, so that's another investment if you want to play with anybody other than those forces, and you're probably going to want to. That's £35. If you're unscrupulous, there are some PDFs kicking around of scanned copies. I'm not encouraging that in any way, but they are there if you are interested. And then there's various scenario bits and pieces that you get, and the usual sort of set of dice and whatnot. It's a good box set to split, especially if you buy another rulebook as well. Or equally, it's a good one that you could go, well, we'll buy one each and swap. Although, to be honest, it's fun collecting the armies, and you're probably going to end up with good and evil as well. So just buy your own. The Battle of Pelennor Fields is the set piece of the whole trilogy. It's the kind of most impressive, it's the biggest forces involved. So I understand why they've chosen that as their starter set and also as their first expansion book. But the actual models they choose, or the actual models they've chosen for the starter set, are a bit... I don't know, I was a bit surprised when I saw them. What's perhaps more surprising is that you can't actually use the armies as they're presented, because the Witch King can only lead 12 guys, and at a push you make the troll that you get a troll chieftain, and he can lead 12 guys as well, so that's 24, but you've still got a load of orcs left over. It's the same with Rohan. Now, the reason why you've got a mounted and dismounted Riders of Rohan is that you are supposed to, you don't have to, there are tokens you can use to represent this, but that becomes a bit of a problem because there's rules surrounding the size of your base. A cavalry model who's got mounts can lose that mount. When you shoot or attack a model, you can, if you're shooting, there's a random 50-50 chance you hit the rider or the mount, and if you're attacking you can make a conscious choice. But if the mount dies, the character is then on foot, so you replace the mounted model with an on foot model. This became a bit ridiculous in the Two Towers edition because they introduced throwing spears, and Riders of Rohan had, as you'll see, some of them are armed with throwing spears, but these were one use only. So you ended up in a ridiculous situation where if you had a Rider of Rohan with a spear, you needed 3 other models to make sure that you had covered all your bases for the kind of various eventualities that model might end up in. Rider of Rohan with throwing spear, you had to have a Rider of Rohan on horse after he'd thrown his spear, but that Rider of Rohan could also lose his mount before he had thrown his throwing spear. So you needed to have a dismounted rider with throwing spear. You then needed to have a dismounted Rider of Rohan who had thrown his throwing spear, so one with a sword and shield or a bow or something like that. And yeah, they acknowledged in the Return of the King that this was a bit silly, and so they adjusted the rule that throwing spears became essentially just regular ranged weapons, and you had an infinite number of them. The Warriors of the Dead don't have a leader. The only leader in the book is the King of the Dead, and he's not in the box set. He's a metal model, so perhaps that's the main reason why he wasn't included, although I don't know how quick or how much effort it would have been to do a plastic resculpt of that. And similarly, there isn't a dismounted Witch King. So if you kill the Fell Beast, there is no model to replace the Witch King. Now, as I say, you are allowed to use tokens for this, but one of the kind of key mechanics is that every model has something called a zone of control, which is a 1-inch bubble around the base of the model, and enemy models cannot move into that zone of control unless they can complete a charge move. So you can't sort of dash round people, you have to go a 1-inch move away. And on a cavalry base, which is I think it's a 40mm base, that's a significant block. So if you can't represent that, it becomes a little bit fiddly. So yeah, I think it was an odd choice. I think if they were going to do Warriors of the Dead, they would have been better off doing Haradrim, because the Warriors of the Dead went through the Mummoks and the kind of Men of the East first, and then you could have put Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli in there. And if they were just going to stick with orcs, then just chuck more Warriors of Minas Tirith in with them. But anyway, it gives you a good starting force. There's things you can do for allies, and then there's nothing stopping you painting an orc in a particularly striking and outstanding way. So here's just an orc captain. Cut him off his little plastic sprue base and glue him to a rock so he's standing up a bit more prominent. But yeah, it was a bit of a kind of head scratcher when you go, this is great, but you can't actually use these armies. It's still the best of the starter sets though. So, as I've said before, my area is elves. That's my thing. I don't really know why. I can't really put my finger on it. I like the fact that in most of their stats they're just better than everybody else. They are expensive points wise, but that's fine. So in the original Lord of the Rings setup, there were 2 elven factions you could do. There was the Rivendell faction and the Lothlorien faction. Now within the Rivendell faction there was a character called Gilder Ingloriant, who, if you included, allowed you to make a sub-faction called the Noldorin Exiles, who were very good, but they were a little bit limited as what you could do with them. So it was more something where you would make a kind of war band out of these guys with him leading it, and then a dozen elves with essentially that thing kind of throwing daggers, which was quite cool. But my Lothlorien army lists, I have a few that I've drawn up as a basic 250 points kind of skirmish force. I have one warband, which is led by Heldir, who is one of the he's a solid choice for any Lothlorien army. He comes in an armoured version and an unarmoured version, depending on kind of what flavour you want to run him as. But I've gone for him with heavy armour, elf bow and elven cloak, and he comes out at 90 points for that. He has low fate points because he dies. That's one of the cool things in a lot of the rules. If your character dies in the film, they tend to have quite low fate, and if they survive, they tend to have quite high fate. So Boromir, for instance, in his Fellowship iteration, has no fate points. He's got 3 wounds, but he's got no fate points, whereas Aragorn has 3. So yeah, Haldir is scheduled to die, but he does have a cool rule where if he dies in close combat, he gets to make a strength 4 strike on every enemy model in base contact before he dies, which is quite cool. So yeah, he comes out at 90 points, and then he's leading 12 Wood Elf warriors. 4 of them have bows, 4 with spears, 3 with elven blades, or elven hand and a half blades as they're known now, and 1 with a banner. And all of them have got throwing daggers. Throwing weapons, whether they're axes, spears, or daggers, are quite cool. It allows you to, when you declare a charge in the movement phase, you stop an inch away, throw whatever your throwing weapon is as a regular shooting attack. And if you kill the model you're throwing them at, you can then finish your charge off and charge somebody else. So potentially you could off 2 people in 2 different stages of the battle, which is good. Banners are cool. They basically allow you to re-roll a combat roll. To decide who wins a fight, you have to break down the sort of blob of models into, wherever possible, 1v1s. And then you see how many attacks each of those models has. And if they're being supported with a guy with a spear or a pike, you can chuck an extra attack in as well. And both players roll a dice for the number of attacks that they have, and it's the highest single roll wins. So if I roll a 5 and my enemy rolls a 6, they win. Even if I've got 11 dice and they've got 1, if theirs beats mine, then they win the fight. If you're a hero, you can spend might points to adjust that. So if I'd rolled a 5 in that scenario with a hero and the guy had rolled a 6, I could spend a might point to turn my 5 into a 6. If it's a draw, you then compare the fight values of the characters, and then the highest fight wins. If the fight values are equal, it's a roll off, 1, 2, or 3. It's the evil player, 4, 5, or 6. It's the good player. But anyway, a banner allows you to re-roll 1 of the dual dice. So when you're doing your straight off rolls, if you roll badly and you're within 3 inches of a banner, you can re-roll 1 of these dice, which is a really, really useful thing. They are about 25 points, which is usually the cost of between sort of 3 and 6 models. So they're an expensive bit of kit. But one of the new rules that they've introduced, I don't know whether it was in The Hobbit or in the current edition, was if the guy holding the banner dies and a person is stood next to him, that person picks the banner up. They drop their whatever kit they've got and they pick the banner back up. So it is actually quite an ongoing investment. And in an evil army, it is vital because generally speaking, your fight is lower and your courage is lower. So you want to be winning the fights and not dying. So as a simple warband, Haldir and 12 Wood Elf warriors, that's 247 points, which is enough. Upping it to 600, which is our kind of club's default setting now, I've managed to get 2 warbands. My main warband is led by Celeborn, who is the king of Lothlorien, although he is subservient to Galadriel, so it's more a kind of Duke of Edinburgh situation, I think. So Celeborn, his basic profile, he has no armour and no weapons, and which isn't great. But thankfully you can upgrade him to have heavy armour, an elven blade and a shield. And if you give him that kit, he comes out at 150 points and is a bit of a beast. He doesn't have a magic weapon, but because of his status, he has some magical powers, and he can re-roll, dual roll, and a wound roll. So he's very good. If you can win that fight, he's very good at killing. And he's got 3 might, will, and fate points as well, so he's not a slouch. He is leading 9 Galadrim warriors who have been upgraded to Galadrim Guard. This is a buff that Celeborn can do. For an extra point, you can upgrade a Galadrim warrior to a Galadrim Guard, and they have an extra courage, which takes them up to courage 6, which is very good. So those 9 guard, there's 4 with elven blades, 4 with shields and spears, and 1 with a banner. And in addition, he's got 6 Galadrim Knights, which are the mounted Galadrim warriors. And 4 of those have got shields, and 2 of them have got bows. And that little warband is quite hard hitting. My second warband is kind of similar to, in fact, I'm just checking out, pretty much identical to the 250 point list. There's Haldir with an elven bow, heavy armour and elven cloak, and 12 Wood Elf warriors, 6 with bows, 3 with spears, 3 with elven blades and throwing daggers. And that comes in at 596 points. So it's not a huge number of models, and actually, price-wise, it's not too expensive to actually go and get that. Another example of a 600 point list is my Mirkwood list. This one comes out at 599 points. My first warband is led by Legolas, who's got an elven cloak. Elven cloaks are great. Basically what they do is give you a kind of stealth or shrouded rule. So if you are more than 6 inches away and there's any kind of intervening terrain, you cannot be seen, which means you can't be shot at. Now I know I said that shooting isn't very good. Most elves are unarmoured and have quite a low defence. So a strength 3 bow against a defence 3 elf is going to kill you on a 4. And there are no saving throws unless you're using a hero's fate point. So just not being able to be shot at in the first instance is quite helpful. In the old edition, wood elves didn't have elven cloaks. They were a 4 or 5 point upgrade. Now they come as standard, and the cost of the elf hasn't actually gone up, which is quite nice. But yeah, Fellowship, they can all have an elven cloak upgrade, and most elven characters can have an elven cloak upgrade as well. It's 5 points, it's absolutely worth taking. So yeah, Legolas with an elven cloak is 105 points, and he's leading 9 Mirkwood Rangers. Mirkwood Rangers are awesome. They're a bit overpriced, they're 14 points each, but they have a special rule, which means that they have 2 in fact. One is that they're bows don't count towards the bow limit, and the second is that they have a thing called Blade Dancer or something like that. Basically, every enemy model that's in base-to-base contact with them after the first grants the elf an extra attack. So if they are outnumbered 3-1, they get their 1 attack as standard plus an extra 1 for each of the other enemies. So they could potentially, if they win the fight and they've got a very high level of fight, so if it's a draw, there's a pretty good chance the elves are going to win. They could then kill those 3 models. He at 9, and then my second warband is Tauriel, the aforementioned female elf of much rage. She has the same Elven Blade rule as well, but she's got 3 attacks to start with, so if she gets outnumbered, she can be, absolutely savage. She's leading 9, and then I have a Mirkwood Captain who has an Elven Glaive, which is a toss-up between an elven blade, a hand-and-a-half sword, and a spear. So they can do some quite cool things with it. And he's leading 4 Mirkwood elves with elven blades and shields, and 3 warriors with elven glaives. And that comes up at 599 points. That is an expensive list to buy, because 10 rangers is 25 quid, and the Mirkwood warriors are actually resin. I bought the Battle Company, which was 40 quid for 12 guys. The captain was like £13. You can't actually buy Legolas or Tauriel at the moment, but they're 15 quid each. So for 600 points, Mirkwood is not a list to go for because they're expensive. What I will do in future segments is, as we write lists and as we play games, I will put up some more sort of 600 point what to do lists. But basically you're going to have 2 or 3 heroes and maxed out more or less followers in those. So in this episode's Hobby on a Shoestring, what I said I would do is have it Middle-earth focused. Because Middle-earth strategy battle game, it's sold out. They ran out of stock and have had to reprint them. I think we're going to see a lot of support for this. But getting started is relatively straightforward. Most factions have 2 or 3 plastic kits that you can get right now that they have in stock. They're basically reboxing everything, so stuff is disappearing off the shelf, off the website, and is coming back in extra packaging. So for instance, if you want to do a Rohan list, there are 2 boxes available. There is a box of 24 guys who are armed with various spears and axes and shields and bows, and then there is a box of 6 Riders of Rohan mounted cavalry. Those are your 2 boxes, and what you will do is you will buy 1 each of those. You will paint one up as a captain, give him a different coloured cloak, and you will paint 2 of them on foot as captains. 1 to represent the guy on the horse when he loses his horse, and 1 to then lead the rest of the others. In fact, what you're probably going to have to do is paint 2, because a captain can only lead 12 guys, and you would then have 18. So yeah, so you would paint up 2 captains on foot, 1 captain mounted, and then that would form the basis of your list, and you would build it around those ideas. But that would be quite a boring list. Now Rohan has loads of characters. Yeah, from Theoden, who's in the new starter set, who is a beautiful new model. There's Eowyn, who's the Shield Maiden of Rohan. She's really cool. She's got some nice rules. If Theoden dies, she has to make a beeline across the board and basically will fight anybody who tries to sort of loot Theoden's corpse. You could even have Merry, Squire of Rohan, if you wanted to, though he is an independent hero, so he can't actually lead anybody. But there's Éomer, there is Hammer and Gamling, and about half a dozen other named characters, plus your sort of generic captains. At the moment, there aren't that many of those available on the Games Workshop website, and those that are mail order only. So you will pay a bit of a price, but with some savvy eBaying, you can probably pick up 2 or 3 named heroes for under 15 quid. I don't think that would be too difficult to do. I would write a list first before you go eBay shopping, because you can very quickly fall into the trap of I must buy all of the people. So yeah, don't do that, because a lot of them you probably won't use. But yeah, whether you're doing Rohan or anybody else, it doesn't really matter. You will buy the infantry box and then their special box. So Uruk-hai don't have cavalry, but their special box is siege troops. So you get some guys with ladders, you get engineers, you get some bombs, and you get some berserkers, which allow you to have some kind of cool specialist units in an Uruk-hai force. If you're orcs, they actually have a bit of a bevy of options, because they also have a troll that you can create one of 3 or 4 different variants, but they also have warg riders, which are the kind of scrawny guys on top of the mental-looking wolf, dog, hyena things. And yeah, you will probably want to pick up one each of those boxes. You're going to need to paint up a warg rider to be in charge. You're probably going to want to make your troll into a chieftain, and then you're going to need 2 or 3 orcs to be captains to make up that list. But you probably get most of those in a 600 point list, to be honest. However, it should be noted that a lot of the boxes, even the newly released ones, are direct order only. So the Galadrim Warriors, where you get 24 Galadrim warriors, and the Galadrim Knights, which gives you 6 of them, are direct order only, even though they've been repackaged. So you can't get them much cheaper. You can, some places like Alchemist Workshops will do a direct order request for you, but you don't get anywhere near the discount that you would normally get, sort of 5-10%, and it doesn't actually do the company themselves that much in terms of business, because the margins are so tight on those direct order only items. It has been heard that the Lord of the Rings stuff is only going to be on shelves in store until the new year. So if you are umming and ahhing about it, especially if it's something that you can get from a third party company, you might want to get it sooner rather than later. Because if you leave it too long, it might all go to direct order only. I don't know whether it's going to be that the stuff you can buy on shelves now will always be available to third-party sellers. But if it's not, that 20-25% discount you can get is worth it, and is something you need to get on board with. So overall, I highly recommend the Middle-earth strategy battle game. It's had a long history to it. It's been going for 16-17 years now. It's a cracking system. It was a bit rough to start with, but they certainly refined it and made it a really compelling game. If you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, it's a must. If you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings, what are you? This will convert you, and if it won't, then I don't know what we're going to do with you. They have promised that they're going to support this properly. I think they definitely will, because the first batch of starter sets sold out very quickly. They have teased new releases for models coming up in the future. There's a new Gandalf the White coming. There's various characters and warriors for Gondor that are coming out. They have some beautiful Forge World models from the Hobbit collection. Thranduil on his elk looks amazing. You can buy Billy Connolly on a pig. What more do you want? So yeah, get involved. If you are wanting to test the water first, eBay is your friend. If you have an idea of what you want to play, go buy those box sets that I've recommended in the Hobby on a Shoestring section. And yeah, find some games. It's a really easy game to learn, but the depth to it is there if you want to explore it. It's not perfect. The tar pit issue is still an issue, but if you are tactically savvy, then you can avoid that happening. I've not covered every aspect of the game, and I'm sure there's other bits we could talk about, but for now, it's a great game, and I highly recommend you get involved. That was it for episode 8 of the Dawn of Rebellion podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you have been inspired to start Lord of the Rings, please drop us a comment and let us know what you went with and how you get on in your battles. That'd be great to hear from you. I know I've been saying it before, but we will be doing something with X-Wing. It's just a matter of getting around to getting hold of the box set and getting in touch with our roving X-Wing pilot, Mike. He should have been to a couple of tournaments by now, so he should have some good stuff to talk about. And yeah, we will be coming up with episode 9. It'll probably be board game themed. I supported the Kickstarter of Nemesis the board game by Awaken Realms, and I've been told that it should be here at some point in November, which is very exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Otherwise, what we might do is hold out until the new Necromunda books come out and then have a follow-up chat with Necromunda Tom, or I might just cave and buy Titanicus and see how that goes. Anyway, thanks for listening to episode 8. If you haven't heard any of our previous episodes, most of them are on SoundCloud and on iTunes podcasting. Reviews are always welcome. We're on Facebook, social media, etc., etc. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to watch the movies again.
Stop